Welcome to the World Lens podcast, a long-form exploration of world affairs, geopolitics, and the forces shaping our future. Today's episode focuses on Russia beyond 2030, a topic that carries enormous weight for global stability. Russia remains one of the world's most consequential states, a nuclear superpower, a major energy exporter, and a nation deeply woven into the security architecture of Europe and Asia. Yet, as we look ahead to the coming decade, Russia faces a complex intersection of pressures: demographic contraction, economic stagnation, technological limitations, and shifting alliances. Joining us today is Dr. Adrian Hale, a structured analytical persona built to express clear, balanced, and deeply researched perspectives on global affairs. His role is to provide the kind of long-horizon analysis that helps us understand where nations are heading and why. Dr. Hale, thank you for joining us. Before we begin, let me ask, why is it so important to understand Russia's future beyond 2030?
It's essential because Russia sits at the heart of several global fault lines: European security, energy markets, nuclear stability, and the geopolitical balance of Eurasia. Understanding Russia's trajectory helps us anticipate the stability, or instability, of the world order. Russia's future affects NATO, affects China, affects the Middle East, and affects global diplomacy. And importantly, Russia is entering a decade where long-term structural pressures begin to outweigh short-term political decisions. Demographic decline, economic constraints, and technological isolation all intensify after 2030. This is when the underlying realities of the Russian state become impossible to postpone or mask.
To understand what comes next, we need to establish the baseline. What does Russia look like as it enters the year 2030?
Russia enters the 2030s as a nation that remains powerful but constrained. Politically, the system is stable, centralized, and deeply entrenched. The leadership may change faces, but the architecture remains the same: a strong presidency, powerful security services, and tightly managed public expression. The system is resilient, not flexible. Economically, Russia is defined by adaptation rather than growth. Sanctions remain in place. Western technologies remain inaccessible. Russia turns to Asia, primarily China and India, for trade and industrial components. The economy functions, but at a lower ceiling. It survives. It does not expand. Militarily, Russia is in recovery. Its nuclear arsenal remains fully intact and modernized, the backbone of its global power. Its conventional forces rebuild slowly, limited by manpower shortages and industrial bottlenecks, yet strengthened by asymmetric capabilities: drones, cyber tools, electronic warfare, and long-range systems. Socially, Russia faces demographic decline and an aging population, creating long-term constraints on labor, innovation, and military recruitment.
Let's move to Russia's political future. After 2030, what are the realistic paths Russia's political system could take?
There are three main trajectories. The first is managed continuity, the most likely scenario. The current political structure remains in place, centralized, controlled, and stable. Leadership may rotate among elites, but the system does not fundamentally change. The second trajectory is technocratic adjustment. Russia remains authoritarian but becomes more pragmatic. Younger technocrats gain influence. The system seeks efficiency without liberalization. The third trajectory is fragmented adaptation. This involves increased regional autonomy, more influence from economic elites, and a political landscape where Moscow negotiates more than it commands. Not collapse, but decentralization under pressure. Across all scenarios, the Russian political system remains resilient. It does not democratize. It does not fracture. It adapts within its established boundaries.
So Russia remains politically consistent, stable, rigid, and centrally controlled. Let's turn to the economic dimension. How does Russia's economy evolve after 2030?
Russia's economy operates under structural limits. Energy remains the backbone, but Asia replaces Europe as the primary market. Industrial recovery is real, but innovation is restricted due to reduced access to Western technology. Sanctions stay in place. Russia restructures supply chains, expands domestic manufacturing, and relies heavily on Chinese and Indian markets. But the result is stagnation, not collapse, and not growth. Technological dependence on China deepens. High-tech isolation becomes the central constraint. In the 2030s, Russia's economy is durable but flat, capable of surviving but not accelerating.
Let's continue by exploring Russia's economic future in more depth. You've described an economy defined by stagnation and adaptation. But what does that actually look like on the ground? How does it shape Russia's capabilities in the 2030s?
Russia's economic reality after 2030 revolves around four core pillars: energy, industry, technology, and global integration. First, energy. Oil and gas remain central to Russia's economy, but the geography of demand changes dramatically. Europe reduces reliance on Russian energy, while China and India become the main buyers. This ensures revenue, but at lower prices and reduced leverage. Russia remains dependent on fossil fuel exports, and the global energy transition gradually shrinks its strategic influence. Second, industry. Russia's industrial base rebuilds portions of its defense sector and expands domestic manufacturing, but technological limitations remain severe. Without Western components, Russia relies on Chinese substitutes. Production continues, but without innovation. Third, technology. This becomes Russia's greatest vulnerability. Brain drain accelerates. Access to advanced microchips is constrained. Domestic tech ecosystems struggle. Russia becomes a technology-dependent state, leaning heavily on Chinese infrastructure. Fourth, global integration. Russia is not isolated, it is reoriented. It engages deeply with the global South, the Middle East, Africa, South Asia, and parts of Latin America. These partnerships provide markets and political support, but cannot compensate for lost Western technology and investment. The result is an economy that survives, but cannot transform.
Let's move to the geopolitical relationship that now anchors Russia's foreign policy: its partnership with China. What does this relationship become in the 2030s?
The Russia-China relationship becomes an asymmetric alignment. Russia needs China more than China needs Russia. Economically, China becomes Russia's primary buyer, lender, supplier, and technological lifeline. This gives China quiet leverage over Russian decision-making. Militarily, cooperation increases: joint exercises, shared components, and strategic coordination. But China avoids deep integration. It protects its own military secrets. Regionally, Central Asia becomes a space of subtle competition. China dominates economically. Russia maintains security influence. The balance becomes increasingly uneven. Long-term, Russia and China do not share identical strategic interests. China seeks global stability for economic expansion. Russia relies on controlled instability to maintain leverage. Their alignment is real, but shaped more by necessity than trust.
Now let's turn to Russia's relationship with the West. A relationship defined by history, rivalry, and deeply entrenched mistrust. What does this relationship look like after 2030?
It becomes a long-term strategic freeze. Sanctions remain permanent. Western economies decouple from Russian energy. Russia reorients toward Asia. Security tensions persist across Europe. NATO strengthens its eastern flank, while Russia modernizes its deterrence posture. Neither side seeks war, but neither side trusts the other. Diplomacy continues, but only in narrow areas. Nuclear arms control, crisis management, space safety, and essential communication. These talks prevent accidents, not improve relations. The psychological divide deepens. The West views Russia as destabilizing. Russia views the West as encircling. These narratives become entrenched. Reconciliation becomes possible only under extraordinary circumstances: drastic leadership change, global crisis, or strategic exhaustion. None of these are structurally likely. The Russia-West relationship after 2030 is not warm, not hopeful, and not reconciled, but it is controlled.
Let's now turn to the instrument through which Russia still exerts significant influence: its military. By the time we reach the 2030s, Russia's armed forces have undergone strain, recovery, and reorganization. So let me ask directly, what does the Russian military actually look like after 2030?
Russia's military after 2030 is defined by enduring strategic strength and structural constraints. First, the nuclear arsenal. It remains the foundation of Russia's global power. Russia maintains the world's largest stockpile, continues modernizing delivery systems, and relies on nuclear doctrine as its ultimate security guarantee. This deterrent ensures that Russia remains a major strategic actor regardless of its economic or demographic challenges. Second, conventional forces. They enter a period of reconstruction. After years of strain, Russia rebuilds brigades, retrains officers, and restores depleted equipment. But manpower shortages, industrial bottlenecks, and technological limits slow recovery. Russia's conventional forces remain capable but uneven, with stronger emphasis on mobility, precision systems, and selective readiness. Third, asymmetric capabilities. These become Russia's advantage. Russia invests heavily in cyber warfare, electronic warfare, space-based tools, long-range strike capabilities, and unmanned systems. These areas allow Russia to influence adversaries and shape conflicts without deploying massive forces. Taken together, Russia remains a serious military power, not through mass mobilization, but through deterrence, selective strength, and asymmetric influence.
Russia's outward strength is one thing, but internal pressures often determine long-term power. Let's talk demographics. What does Russia's population look like in the 2030s, and how does it shape the nation's future?
Russia faces one of the most severe demographic contractions in the industrialized world. Birth rates remain low, mortality rates in certain regions remain high, and outward migration of young professionals accelerates. The population shrinks and ages simultaneously. This creates a long-term labor shortage. Fewer workers for industry, fewer recruits for the military, fewer taxpayers to sustain pensions and health care. Russia compensates with increased reliance on migrants from Central Asia, particularly in construction, logistics, and urban labor markets. This supports the economy, but creates new cultural and social pressures. Demographic decline does not collapse Russia, but it steadily narrows the country's capacity for sustained growth, innovation, and military expansion. By the late 2030s, demographic constraints become one of Russia's defining strategic limitations.
So even with economic stagnation and demographic decline, Russia remains influential. That brings us to a larger question. What is Russia's actual role in the international system after 2030?
Russia becomes a constrained great power, influential but limited. Russia remains relevant through several channels. It acts as a security disruptor, shaping regional balances in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Central Asia. It remains a diplomatic heavyweight in selective arenas such as the United Nations, nuclear negotiations, OPEC plus coordination, and arms sales. It becomes a resource and commodities partner for the global South, supplying energy, grain, fertilizer, and military equipment. It positions itself as a counterweight to Western influence, offering alternative partnerships and strategic support to states seeking distance from the West. Russia cannot dominate the world stage, but it cannot be ignored. Its influence shifts from expansive to strategic, from global ambition to targeted disruption.
We've explored Russia's political system, its economy, its military, and its demographic constraints. Now we come to the question that ties all those dynamics together. What are the realistic future scenarios for Russia after 2030? Not fantasies, not wishful thinking, but the paths grounded in Russia's structural realities. Dr. Hale, walk us through the futures Russia may face.
There are three plausible scenarios. The first is managed continuity, the most likely outcome. In this scenario, Russia's political system remains centralized and resilient. The economy stagnates but does not collapse. Dependency on China deepens but remains manageable. Relations with the West stay adversarial but controlled. Russia survives on stability and inertia. The second scenario is fragmented adaptation. Here, internal pressures force Russia into a more decentralized model. Regional elites gain influence. Economic interests push for local autonomy. Moscow remains dominant, but must rely on negotiation rather than strict control. This Russia remains functional, but increasingly complex internally. The third scenario is pragmatic stabilization, the least likely, but possible if necessity forces change. Russia cautiously reopens limited engagement with the West, implements modest economic reforms, and reduces dependency on China. The state remains authoritarian, but becomes more pragmatic and technocratic. Across these scenarios, the defining theme is continuity under strain. Russia adapts, slowly and reluctantly, but it does not fundamentally transform.
That brings us to the long horizon. Beyond the 2030s, beyond immediate pressures, what does Russia actually look like in the 2040s?
The Russia of the 2040s is shaped by accumulated pressures. Demographically, the population contracts significantly. The workforce shrinks, aging accelerates, and regional depopulation deepens. Geopolitically, Russia's center of gravity shifts decisively toward Asia. China becomes its dominant partner, economically, technologically, and strategically. Russia maintains autonomy, but the asymmetry becomes larger and more visible. Militarily and economically, Russia remains a serious power, but one limited by capacity. Its military relies on nuclear deterrence, asymmetric tools, and selective modernization. Its economy stabilizes into a low-growth equilibrium, strong enough to endure, but not to innovate. The Russia of the 2040s is weaker than it was, but more resilient than many expect. It remains a strategic power, capable of influencing outcomes, shaping crises, and asserting itself on the world stage. Russia does not disappear. It changes form.
And now, as we conclude, I want to ask one final question. If you had to summarize Russia's trajectory after 2030 in one core truth, what would it be?
Russia's future is defined by power reshaped by limits. It remains influential because of what it already possesses: nuclear weapons, geography, resources, and political resilience. But its long-term constraints, demographic decline, economic stagnation, and strategic dependency, steadily narrow its options. Russia endures. Russia adapts. But it does not ascend. It becomes a power that must be understood not by what it gains, but by how it manages decline without collapse.
A nation defined by endurance. A great power reshaped by constraints. A country whose future affects the stability of the entire world. This concludes our long-form exploration of Russia after 2030. Dr. Hale, thank you for your insights today.
Thank you. Understanding Russia's long horizon is essential for understanding the century ahead.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for this in-depth global analysis. This has been the
World Lens Podcast,
where we bring clarity to complexity and depth to global affairs. Stay informed, stay aware, and join us next time as we continue exploring the forces that shape our world.